Actress, model, and real-life princess, Grace Kelly defined Hollywood glamour.
This can't be love because I feel so well. No sobs.
She's kind of named appropriately because she kind of did everything with a kind of grace. But she had this fantastic sense of humor.
This can't be love. I get no dizzy spell.
She was somebody whom the fashion people loved, the fans loved, and the directors loved because they could mold her as they wanted.
My heart does not stand still.
She was a beautiful girl and she was groomed for stardom, and obviously she went down very well with the public.
In less than a decade, she had a movie career that would take others a lifetime to achieve.
In your eyes.
There are one or two people who come to the public attention who you know are just born to it. I think she was born to it.
Grace Kelly was born on the 12th of November, 1929, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
You could say she was always a star in the making. I mean, when you're born with those looks, where else are you going to go? But it wasn't the most natural path for her. She came from very good Pennsylvania stock.
She came from a very good family. She was very well educated, thoroughly middle class. Her father was an Olympic rower.
And she went to a very kind of well-to-do convent school. I think her parents rather disdained the idea of acting, even though she was very keen early on.
And who thought that his daughter being an actress was akin to being a streetwalker. And he really didn't like it.
It was certainly at the, going against probably what her parents wished for her. And that kind of gave you an idea of the strength, the inner strength that Grace Kelly had, that she was willing to kind of go into battle for her own beliefs. And that would be throughout her career. She would put up a fight when she didn't like something.
After graduating from high school, Kelly decided to pursue a career on the stage against her family's wishes.
In her graduation yearbook, Grace Kelly was described as a famous star of stage and screen, which seems to me to indicate that she was probably a star in the making from a very early age.
So while there was a path laid out for her, she became a model. She was stunningly good looking, and she was intent on getting into the theatre at the very least.
She had the looks, she had the posture, she had the attitude. All she needed to develop were the skills.
Through her family connections, Kelly gained a place at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts.
There were sort of actors and playwrights within the family. Her uncle George actually won a Pulitzer Prize. And he was one of the guys actually who helped her get into the New York Academy of Dramatic Arts.
After graduating, Grace Kelly continued to pursue a career on the stage and acted in over 60 live television performances.
There's no question about it that this is fantastically good training ground. It allowed her to learn in the field, as it were. TV was fast, it was made fast, and she played an enormous variety of roles. So it gave her the ability to be able to shift from one character to another fairly swiftly.
Feeling more comfortable around cameras, Grace Kelly pursued a career in television and film roles over theatre.
She'd done a lot of theatre work, but the problem with her theatre work was, good as she was, she didn't have the voice for it, really.
And she worked very hard on getting her delivery out there, and actually if you watch the later films, there's something quite strident about her delivery. She's quite forceful, and I think that comes from the fact that she was told very early on she had quite a weak voice and she needed to work on it.
And so she felt much more comfortable as a film star when she suddenly managed to get into film.
She made her film debut in the 1951 film 14 Hours.
A rather sort of plain melodrama about a suicide on a ledge who's about to throw himself off and the policeman's trying to talk him down. And she, through her TV work, got no more than a cameo, really. She plays a divorcee in a lawyer's office who sort of gazes out the window and sort of is touched by the moment and decided not to go through with the divorce. You can hardly call it a role that would change things. It really was a very small part.
Hey, good looking,
Although her performance in the film may have gone unnoticed by critics, she made an impression on movie star Gary Cooper during a visit to the set.
Well, I could see why Gary Cooper would want her in the film. She was, you know, sort of ice-cold blonde, and he probably had a penchant for her, maybe, and I'm sure she must have had one for him.
He liked her very much. He said she was totally unusual, not the sort of Hollywood star he was used to, and he liked that.
But it wasn't just how beautiful she was. There was something very kind of robust about her personality, very earthy. You know, she talked a good shop with the men. She kind of stood her own ground.
Her relationship with Gary Cooper would prove pivotal to her career, as he convinced director Fred Zinnemann and producer Sam Spiegel to cast her in their next film.
Well, I would have thought Sam Spiegel would have taken a shine to her. She was blonde, and he was very much into blondes.
Certainly, it was one of those great moments of fortuitous meeting, because Cooper was a real powerhouse. I mean, he's probably one of the very few actors who could have persuaded those two to actually even look at somebody, let alone cast them.
Do you, Amy, take Will to be your lawful wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, until death do you part?
I do.
Ring, please.
In 1952, Kelly starred opposite Gary Cooper in Fred Zinnemann's High Noon.
Then, by the authority vested in me by the laws of this territory, I pronounce you man and wife.
When it came to casting High Noon, he went to director Fred Zinnemann and the producer Sam Spiegel, both of whom were fairly tough, nuts to crack, and persuaded them somehow to have a look at her. And the rest is history.
Not till you kiss me.
And people thought, well, who is this Grace Kelly? They knew they'd seen her a lot on television, but they'd never seen her really much in movies. But she was a great success in that. And the film was a great success because Westerns in those days were very popular.
Will, I'm begging you, please let's go.
I can't.
Don't try to be a hero. You don't have to be a hero, not for me.
I'm not trying to be a hero. If you think I like this, you're crazy. Look, Amy, this is my town. I've got friends here. I'll swear in a bunch of special deputies, and with a posse behind me, maybe there won't even be any trouble.
You know there'll be trouble.
High Noon is kind of an interesting one. She's kind of a little stiff in it and a little kind of ornate, but yet it kind of works for the kind of nobility of the film. It's not one of my favourites in that respect. I always remember sort of Gary Cooper more than anything. But then every time you watch it again, you sort of go, oh yeah, Kelly is in it. Yeah, there she is. And she's an important part of the whole kind of moral thrust of the film.
I mean it. If you won't go with me now, I'll be on that train when it leaves here.
I've got to stay.
The role itself was not particularly showy. I mean, the film, which is it's quite an ascetic Western, is really all about Gary Cooper. It's all about his figure in this town. So everybody else are kind of satellites revolving around him.
All right, Kate, come on up.
Somehow or other, she just attracts the eye.
As soon as you walk through that door, come on, I'll hold my fire.
If you're watching a screen and you're moving away from the central thing to someone in the background, then that is what real star quality and star power is all about.
But I think all these kind of producers were drawn to her like a flame. And then, of course, the camera just adored her. So you put a screen test up and you put that in front of John Ford or Sam Spiegel and they kind of go, well, that's easy, that's kind of simple. She just glows on the screen. And she did.
Charming. Everything's so neat and clean. I'll be unbearably frank and say I didn't expect this.
Well, I'll be frank and say that you're a big surprise to me, too.
After gaining attention in High Noon, Grace was cast by John Ford to star opposite Clark Gable in Magambo, and she signed a 7-year contract with MGM.
Every lion in the territory took off. He was a little man with a beard. He was an authority on some kind of a fleet.
Well, I sincerely hope I've disappointed you.
Come on, I'll show you your room.
It was kind of toward the end, actually, of the contract era in a funny way, and she was one of the last ones, and she would wrestle within that contract as the years went on. But certainly, she only had 2 films under her belt, and it did give her a strong position to work from.
She said, well, I don't really want to make the film, but the fact that it's in Africa, I've never been to Africa, I've never acted with Clark Gable, and I love to be directed by John Ford. Those were the 3 reasons. She said, if it had been shot in Arizona, I wouldn't have done it.
She kind of laid out a law in it that at any point she wanted to go back to New York and do theatre, then she would be allowed to, and MGM agreed to that. So she, again, was setting her stall out very early on and getting her demands met.
Oh, darling.
Now, don't get excited.
What's the matter with him?
Excessive reaction to the Tsetse fly shot, that's all.
It's a ridiculous film, Magambo, but considering the wealth of stars on the screen there, we've got Clark Gable, Ava Gardner. She does extremely well. I think that she is. She's got a sort of frailty, a strong frailty about her.
Why are they fighting?
Probably over a female.
Thank you very much for everything.
I'll put it on the bill.
I think she fell for Clark Gable on it.
Grace Kelly had become infatuated with Gable, and news soon spread about their affair. The two attended the Academy Awards together, in which she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
Sam, you're not going to tell me that you've been taking all this seriously, are you? You know how it is on safari. It's in all the books. The woman always falls for the white hunter, and we guys make the most of it. Do you blame us?
And she said afterwards, in a rather strange way, she said, well, if you're in a tent with Clark Gable, what on earth do you do? But, you know, she had a reputation as being someone who the gossip people really couldn't get hold of at all, even with this affair with Clark Gable, if it was an affair.
Grace's reputation remained intact, despite stories printed in the press. She seemed untouchable, which attracted the attention of Hollywood's greatest directors. Her most famous partnership was with Alfred Hitchcock, which changed her career entirely.
The relationship between Grace Kelly and Alfred Hitchcock is potentially the most important of both their careers, you could argue. They found the kind of perfect opposite. It's kind of like soulmates almost, rather than a mentor and, you know, and his pupil.
He's definitely always went for the cool blonde, and I would imagine she probably could handle him.
I think he adored her. I think he really, really liked what she looked like on screen.
She was sort of ice cold. They felt she was ice cold. She was someone who was a goodish actress, but very beautiful and wore clothes splendidly, but a little bit on the cold side. Exactly what Hitchcock wanted. So it was really Hitchcock, despite Mogambo and despite High Noon, who really made her reputation.
One day, Tony and I were going to spend the weekend in the country with friends, and while we were waiting on the platform, I noticed my handbag was missing, and the letter was inside.
Where was this?
Dial M for Murder was their first collaboration. The thriller centers around an ex-tennis pro who plots to murder his wife. Now rated by the American Film Institute as one of the best mysteries of all time, it would change the way the world looked at Grace Kelly.
Of all the directors that she worked with, he was the one who brought out her sexuality. He was unusual in Hollywood directors in that he was not afraid of not only photographing beautiful women, but photographing beautiful women as beautifully as he possibly could and making them as sexually provocative as he possibly could.
I was trying to get through to the police when I discovered my husband was on the line. I naturally thought that he would call the police from the hotel before he came here.
Famously, when he brought her in for the first casting on Dial M for Murder, he did what he always did, and he dressed her like a doll. And she went along with this, he put these various dresses on. He had this idea that she was starting very bright clothes, and then as she was being kind of got at by her husband, the clothes would gradually get darker and darker as the film went on.
They had a great rapport, which could be seen on screen, and Hitchcock was very hands-on in directing her.
He gave her a role that was unlike any role she'd had before, and that was rather significant for her.
But for the famous scene where the telephone rings, he devised this very kind of florid robe for her. And she kind of said, well, Alfred, if the phone rang in the middle of the night and I got up, I would not be wearing this kind of very elaborate, you know, florid kind of robe. And he went, well, what would you be wearing? And she said, I would just simply be in my nightgown. And of course, he adored that idea. You know, she could walk across the screen in a nightgown to pick up the phone, and the horror would begin.
He changed the way she appeared on screen. For example, in the scene where she is about to be murdered, it's a sort of devastating potential rape scene. It's not actually just a murder. It's a rape scene. He does it specifically with her to make her look as sexy as possible.
And from then on, you could see that she would give him what he wanted. She would give him the blonde, the iciness.
And so, having got her, he could then do anything he wanted with her.
Grace Kelly was breaking the mold for female leads in Hollywood and continued her partnership with Hitchcock alongside James Stewart in Rear Window.
Her entrance into Rear Window is one of cinema's great shots, and it's a naughty shot if you kind of know Hitchcock's intentions. He's just kind of waking up, and Grace Kelly kind of walks in almost a sinister manner to lean forward to kiss him, but as she does, the camera does a double exposure, and it sort of shimmers. And the idea, I think, in Hitchcock's head is the camera was almost orgasming as the shot happens.
How's your leg?
It hurts a little.
And your stomach?
Empty as a football.
And your love life?
Not too active.
Anything else bothering you?
Mm-hmm. Who are you?
Hitchcock shot her beautifully. He knew he'd got a real beauty there. It's what he liked and what he did very well, which was to make sure that people noticed her as a beauty, as a clothes horse, and then as an actress.
Carol?
He films her like a kind of ministering angel. I mean, he uses every trick in the book of lighting, camera angles, never to make her look like some goddess.
It's right off the Paris plane. You think it'll sell?
Well, that depends on the quote, you know. Let's see, now there's the airplane ticket over and import duties, hidden taxes, profit markup.
A steal at $1,100.
$1,100? They ought to list that dress on the stock exchange.
Why, we sell a dozen a day in this price range.
Who buys them? Tax collectors?
Even if I had to pay, it would be worth it. Just for the occasion.
Well, I think that's what everybody loved about Rear Window and Grace Kelly. The dresses were wonderful and she could wear them very well. So in those days, too, fashion was kind of important, and the girls were always dressed well, even if it wasn't always, shall we say, appropriate to the part.
Where does a girl have to go before you notice her?
Well, if she's pretty enough, she doesn't have to go anywhere. She just has to be.
It was a strange relationship with James Stewart, who thought that Kelly was wonderful. But in fact, there was a great space between them. Even though they kissed in the film, she was a Manhattan socialite. He was concentrating on what on earth was going on outside the window, possibly murders and things like that. So it was kind of a romance which wasn't a romance at all in a certain way.
He lives alone. Probably had a very unhappy marriage.
Oh, it's enchanting. It's almost as if it were being written especially for us.
No wonder he's having so much trouble with it.
Despite her incredible beauty, she had a believability which Hitchcock captured beautifully.
What fundamentally Rear Window is about, it's about a man who won't marry the most beautiful woman in the world. And not only is she the most beautiful woman in the world, she's totally kind of at his behest and giving to him. She's very funny, she's tremendously daring, and she goes along with things. So it's all about a man who's paranoid about marriage. And the great gag that Hitchcock gives it is his fiancée happens to be Grace Kelly. You know, what man wouldn't want to marry her is the joke, but of course James Stewart doesn't. So there's this lovely irony about her presence in the film. And of course, her husband will then put her into the risk of being murdered.
You know, for a minute, that Tom Doyle almost had me convinced I was wrong.
But you're not.
Look, In the whole courtyard, only one person didn't come to the window.
It gave her the opportunity to play quite a strong, independent woman, knowing her own mind, powerful, literally powerful, because of course she's the only one who really is on her feet, having to wheel sort of James Stewart around, who's in his wheelchair. So she's in control of much of the film. And I think that she comes out of it with flying colours.
When Rear Window was released, Kelly received critical acclaim. She had turned down the role opposite Marlon Brando in On the Waterfront to star in the film, a part that won Eva Marie Saint an Oscar.
Could she have taken On the Waterfront, and would she have done as good a job as Eva Marie Saint? It's kind of one of those unknown things you'd never know, really.
I don't think she would have been as good as Eva Marie Saint. I think she was too sort of upper class, and her accent at that time would not have been right for On the Waterfront.
Kelly is a more upmarket lady in the sense, and it would be hard for her to, I think, have played that kind of role. But yet she had an earthier side to her. It's one of those kind of points of gravity in her that attracts people to her, I think. And so I would have been very interested to see On the Waterfront in that respect, but not at the expense of Rear Window.
I think that her decision was the right one. She wanted to work again with a man that she trusted, a director that she trusted, a director who loved her and would make her look even better in the next film, which in fact he did, because Rear Window is one of the 4 greatest of Hitchcock's masterpieces, without a shadow of a doubt.
How long you and Frank been married?
10 years.
She was forging her own career and fought to get the role in The Country Girl.
I'm just a girl from the country. The theater and the people in it have always been a complete mystery to me. They still are.
She was contracted with MGM and she wanted to be in a Paramount film called Country Girl. Very much. I think she saw it as a really, really interesting role and one that, might take her to the next level.
And she played Dowdy, and played it really quite well, because she was just an ordinary wife who couldn't deal with this handsome lover and this alcoholic husband. And there was something there which transcended most of the other things she did.
Naturally, Mr. Dodd, you exaggerate the sentiment to make your point.
Are you for him or against him?
I'm his wife. All I want is complete honesty from both of you. Flattery's cheap, Mr. Dodd. How about a little costly truth?
It's another one of those films that may have dimmed with time a little bit. She plays the lover caught between the 2 men, Bing Crosby and William Holden. She's married to the has-been Bing Crosby, an alcoholic. It feels a touch melodramatic by modern standards.
And in that film, she wasn't a fashion plate at all. She didn't wear an awful lot of makeup. She played a rather dowdy wife of somebody, a very difficult man who was once a good singer but now was an alcoholic. And there I think she had a certain kind of warmth, which she certainly didn't have in most of her other films.
There's nothing quite so mysterious and silent as a dark theater. A night without a star.
I think she was someone who, had she gone on, she might well have blossomed as an actress more. But what did it matter? If you're so beautiful, if you wear clothes so well, if you're used by great directors like Ford, Zinnemann and Hitchcock, perhaps it doesn't matter that you're the most talented actress in the world.
Grace was familiar with the play and desperately wanted the role, but MGM would have to loan her out to Paramount for it to happen.
MGM refused to let her go, and she threatened to leave them and just walk out if they didn't let her make this film, and they relented. I think that's a really good indication of how much they valued her. They didn't want to lose her. They saw her as, if not a big star, then potentially a huge star.
The Country Girl is another example of Grace Kelly famously digging her heels in and getting her own way. But she was never petulant or particularly a diva in that respect. I think when she kind of got tough, she got tough for the right reasons. And she was desperate to do the movie with Bing Crosby. She saw it as a very exciting challenge for her, a chance to kind of prove her mettle that, you know, the Academy still hadn't quite recognised, maybe the critics haven't quite recognised her talents yet.
Why is it that women always think they understand men better than men do?
Maybe because they live with them. If you're not careful, you're going to have them full of whiskey before morning.
She had a fantastically confident background, so I think this definitely provided immense fuel and ammunition for her when she had to deal with studio heads. Rare enough for a female star.
I would have said that Grace Kelly had a lot of power at that particular time. She was very much the leading lady, and although the studio bosses were much tougher then, I guess her powers of persuasion finally let her have her wish.
And she simply went into the office and said, if you don't, then I'll quit, and I'll go back to New York and I'll do theatre and I'll be perfectly happy. And I think she meant it. I think she was willing to do that. And MGM wouldn't dare do that in the end. And, you know, by the time of Rear Window, you know, she was a big star. So it wasn't like she was an unknown doing this, but it still was a big risk of her to take, and she got her way.
Hollywood's great night when the experts confirm the public's choice. Best Actress Award goes to Grace Kelly, acclaimed by Vox Pop for her role in The Country Girl.
The Country Girl would win her an Oscar, beating Judy Garland to the award, much to everyone's surprise.
It's often cited as the film that shouldn't have won things when A Star Is Born was going up against it. Famously, it was Grace Kelly versus Judy Garland, and the sentimental vote was with Judy Garland, who was very unwell, and it was her comeback role.
It was a terrible, controversial Oscar, because Judy Garland was up for it in A Star Is Born. Should have got it, really. But Judy was ill, and they set up cameras in Judy's hospital bed, everything ready for her to get the Oscar. And then when Grace Kelly got the Oscar instead, they just removed the cameras, moved it by.
And I think there's still a kind of an aura of resentment around that particular win. You know, people don't think of her as a great actress in the same respect that maybe they felt Judy Garland was deserving. And in hindsight, you could say that A Star Is Born certainly is the film that people remember.
Judy Garland was a huge star, but she was no great beauty. I mean, she was a fabulous talent. The thing about Grace Kelly was that she was becoming increasingly talented and becoming increasingly confident, but she always had, you know, a God-given gift of fabulous beauty.
Grace Kelly then headed to the south of France to star opposite Cary Grant in To Catch a Thief, her last collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh, lovely day. Have you ever seen any place in the world more beautiful? Just look at the colors of the sea down there in the sky, and those little pink and green buildings on the hill. Think of all those roofs you could climb over.
In another film by Hitchcock, To Catch a Thief, rather oddly, she appears in Monaco, where she later became princess, driving a car with Cary Grant, producing a picnic and saying, "What would you like, breast or leg?" Thought to be terribly daring at the time.
You want a leg or a breast?
You make the choice.
To Catch a Thief is a lesser Hitchcock. It's a bit more frivolous. It's more of a caper movie. It's a lovely travelogue about the south of France. But one of the wonderful things it's a beautiful film about Grace Kelly.
Should I ask the social director to introduce us?
No. I was just wondering which was the best way out of here.
Well, the Mediterranean used to be this way.
Well, I'm a gambler. Let's try that.
It's all about really how wonderful and sexy and beautiful she is. And the flirtation with Cary Grant is what really sings out of the movie. It includes what I think is one of the great screen kisses. She just leads him like a puppy dog along by the lead, and she gives him the kiss and then she shuts the door.
It was one of those films that they try to remake now, and they just can't quite do. They can't quite get that sense of lightness.
I think Hitchcock had less interest in the kind of the plot about the thief and who was replacing him, who was the secret other, and much more interested in this May-December romance that was blossoming. And they really dressed her up. He really got Edith Head to work on how she looked. And for the ballroom sequence, his instructions were basically, she has to kind of knock them dead. She's got to walk in and the whole show stops. So Edith Head went away, and whatever secret Edith Head had, I don't know, but she created this golden gown, which is just astonishing. But she managed to sort of pad it out in appropriate areas. And then she waltzes to in front of Hitchcock. And if anyone remembers the sequence, it is a drop-dead moment. It is the moment where, you know, the traffic stops and in walks Grace Kelly and the camera just laps it up.
Whilst attending the Cannes Film Festival, Grace met Prince Rainier of Monaco at a photo shoot at his palace. The two fell in love, and the world watched the dream romance unfold.
She met him actually at Cannes, and then they corresponded, and he definitely wanted a wife. What sort of a wife did he want? Someone who was well-bred, beautiful, not your usual Hollywood star. She was exactly it.
The prince proposed to Kelly. She accepted.
I think just taking the step of marriage is enough to give a girl a bit of a twinge, and certainly leaving home to do it is, well, it's a very moving thing. I don't know how to explain it.
Crossing the Atlantic on a wave of publicity, the liner Constitution carried Grace Kelly, her parents, and another 80 relatives and friends in true Hollywood style to Monaco. Throughout the voyage, whether playing deck games with her two nieces or enjoying the company of her pets, Grace has seldom escaped the headlines, the price of being the Hollywood star who won the heart of the eligible Prince Rainier.
There was kind of resonance building, though, at the same time with her association with the south of France. You know, people look back on To Catch a Thief and see maybe the beginning of the end of her acting career. Maybe she was being seduced by the landscape she would eventually go to live in.
At the Royal Palace, the guards, members of one of the world's smallest armies, are ready to receive their prince and future princess. And as an accompaniment to the drive through the tiny kingdom, the cheers of welcome rang out. So the Prince of Monaco brought his betrothed to her future hilltop home, a castle of dreams that came true for a lovely American girl.
Feeling far above par. Oh, how lucky we are. While I give to you.
It was an enormous event, and everybody thought, well, this is exactly what every Hollywood star should do eventually. Get married to an aristocrat or a noble or a king and live happily ever after.
And she certainly was the fairy tale princess. She looked wonderful, she dressed beautifully, she knew how to behave. And I think she did a tremendous amount for Monaco. I mean, she was the one really who put it on the map, because that's who they all wanted to see and photograph.
True love. So on and on.
In 1956, MGM released Kelly's last film, the musical High Society.
True love, true love.
The last film that she made was High Society, which in a funny sort of way was a fitting swan song to her career.
High Society was really a musical version of the Philadelphia story, which she'd acted in on the stage earlier in her career. And she played very well in that too.
But it's this wonderful little microcosm musical of decadent society at work, with this kind of idea of the journalist going in.
For you and I have a guardian angel on high.
She even sang a little bit, but they decided that her voice wasn't good enough and they dubbed her, actually, for the songs. But she looked very beautiful. She did very well. It was a nice epitaph for her.
Well, let's be honest. I'll admit it. I'm still in love with you. I don't want you to get married again because I still think you can become a wonderful woman.
Thank you. I haven't the same high hopes for you.
Well, I don't want to become a wonderful woman.
Oh, isn't it enough you almost spoiled my life without spoiling my wedding?
High Society is one of those films, and there were a few in Kelly's career that seemed to kind of have a greater meaning. They seemed to echo her real life in an unforeseen way. It had this kind of other level in which you can almost see it as a kind of metaphor for the tug of war over Kelly's life. Being pulled away by Rainier and high society and the perfect fairy tale marriage, and Hollywood trying to tug her back the other way in the shape of Bing Crosby as the kind of earthy, funny, natural guy who's perfect for her next door.
Gee, I didn't know you wanted a husband who would be kind of a high priest to a virgin goddess.
Oh, stop using those foul words.
During filming, she wore her engagement ring, her Cartier engagement ring that Rainier gave her. Now, in the film, in the fantasy of the film, she's won over by Hollywood. Bing Crosby wins her back, and it's all great. But of course, in real life, she was to say farewell to movies for good.
Since the dear day of our meeting,
I'm sure she didn't realise it was her last film. And whether she herself ever wanted to go on performing, but found out that she wasn't going to really be allowed to, I don't know. But I suppose at least it was a happy film to go out on.
Going out on an up. It's rather than going out on some serious dramatic role that would have, may have garnered her another Oscar. But the great thing is that people remember her for that because of the joy of the film. And I think that's a pretty good way to be remembered.
With her days as Hollywood's leading lady over, she would now become the princess that Hollywood could only dream of, and the world watched on.
One of the sad things about Grace Kelly was, of course, that she stopped making films when she got married. I'm not entirely sure that she thought it was going to, but Rainier was very jealous and extremely possessive, and didn't like her movies and didn't like them being shown. He tried to buy up all the prints of several of them, and failed, I'm happy to say. But he certainly disrupted her career.
There were tensions within the fact that Rainier said, as my wife, as the Princess of Monaco, you can't be doing Hollywood. It almost echoes her father. Being an actress is not not acceptable. But it was to her credit, to some extent, that she respected her husband's wishes. I'm not saying her husband's wishes weren't necessarily correct, but she understood what was needed.
It took her away from her home as a movie star, and she had a long career ahead of her, I'm sure of it, which was stopped as a result of that.
No longer acting, Grace Kelly took her role as a princess, a mother, and a charity patron very seriously.
And she took up her role in charity and as a kind of fashion presence, as this kind of European queen, with a kind of respectful distance, I think. I think what you saw on screen is also a little bit of what you got in her second life as a princess.
Princess Grace was still offered roles, including from Hitchcock, but it was forbidden by her husband, much to everyone's dismay.
The prince was absolutely adamant that not only could she not actually continue her career, but he wouldn't show in the Principality any of her films. He just did not allow it, because he thought her films were not quite right for a princess.
Hitchcock, in fact, subsequent to her marriage, offered her the role of Marnie, opposite Sean Connery, and she really wanted to do it. And her husband said no. No wife of mine is going to play a kleptomaniac with sexual problems.
And I think we lost a chance for her to pursue more challenging roles and more challenging work. Marnie would have been a really interesting part for her to play. It would have pushed her beyond just the loving gaze of Hitchcock's camera into something darker and more hard to love. Tippi Hedren is terrific in the movie, but I would love to have seen Grace Kelly's version of that. And I think her career is looked back on as much for what it gave as for what it missed. And I think the marriage did away in that respect.
We wonder sometimes when she was locked up in Monaco, she was a strict Catholic, always had been a strict Catholic, but nevertheless, we wonder whether she would have loved to have actually continued with her career.
On the 13th of September, 1982, Princess Grace died in a road accident in the hills of Monaco. Her daughter Stephanie was with her, but survived.
The Principality of Monaco has been in mourning since Princess Grace died on Tuesday. It was a morning of intense emotion. The princess was an enormously popular figure. Her death has come as a painful blow.
Politicians, European royalty, and Hollywood stars, such as Cary Grant and James Stewart, were in attendance.
Very sad ending. In a car similar to the one in which she drove Cary Grant in To Catch a Thief.
And who knows what really happened.
Prince Rainier and Princess Caroline were unable to hide their anguish, and there are rumors in Monaco that the prince has been so grief-stricken by his wife's death that he may now abdicate in favor of his son. Princess Stephanie, the youngest of the royal children, is still in hospital recovering from the crash which killed her mother.
When anybody that famous dies, the place is awash with sort of conspiracy theories about what really happened and was she actually driving? At the end of the day, if we can't prove it, does it really matter? I mean, the fact is that somebody died and somebody survived.
She died before she truly lost her looks, so she will forever be this kind of serene, astonishingly beautiful presence in front of the camera. She has a kind of tragedy that kind of completes the arc of her fairy tale life above life thing that she led. But above all, so it was a loss of a human life, and it was deeply tragic.